we've lost a few of our cultural icons, the iconotypes, the celebrities. Been watching some John David Ebert. He has this review. I've watched more movie reviews than I've watched movies at this point. So he reviews, I think it's On Being John Malkovich or something along those lines. And he talks about how there's this resonance where the celebrity begins to see his own face or her face everywhere. And the identity is split infinitely, and you spend more time as a celebrity looking at a projection of yourself, looking at a mask, rather than living life as yourself. Which is really what John David Ebert, he then takes that concept and puts it forward into cyberspace as the avatar. So we spend more time, rather than just being ourselves, we spend more time, okay, how do I curate my Facebook and my Instagram, my social media to look good? How do I make a really good tweet so I could get a lot of volume and clicks and shares and follows and whatever? So there's this concept that really this idea of the celebrity, which is an extension of the aristocracy, but it's brought into a media age, a populist age, a priestly age. It's brought into this age, this demagogic, Chthonian age, and it's being universalized to all of us, and the process is sped up, and it's just like, Epstein, and other people, Trudel Tom, these people, they may be real people, and we can talk to them, we can get to know them, we can learn their life story, but they appear to us, they appear in the cultural space, whether it's a big space like America or it's a small space like, edgy YouTube video sector. These people cease to exist as people, and they become iconotypes, they become celebrities, they become avatars. They cease to be people, they are avatars, they are nodes in a cultural space. They are either negative nodes or positive nodes, and so when we lose them, the cultural space changes. Whether we lose them voluntarily or involuntarily, or whatever is going on here, that's almost less important than the fact that they as a node either come into existence or cease to exist within that cultural space. Now, whatever they're doing in a different cultural space, maybe Epstein has gone to heaven or hell, or we don't know, he's being reincarnated. We don't know where these people are going, but for the purposes of an analysis of this space, whatever context we're working in, the space has changed because they've left it. So there's their existence within some kind of universal reality, but then there's their existence within a particular space. And that's important. That's important to understand and realize. So we're talking about Mayan traditionalism. We're talking about the fact that, interesting, we're talking about the fact that if we're speaking about power, making YouTube videos is not the path to power. And it's very sad to see people on various internet platforms, anonymous internet platforms, talking about this is the path to power. We just need to intellectualize. We need the perfect ideology. We need to organize. We need activism. We need to put up flyers. We need guerrilla activism. We need to spread the word. And they believe that this is the path to power. This is not the way powerful people actually think and act. People who really seek out power, not the illusion of power, not the concept of power as an abstraction, not power as some sort of visceral fetish or a vicarious fetish where you're like thinking about history and your place in history, and you're thinking of being part of a political movement that could be somehow powerful in some non-existent future. No, people who actually seek power and take practical steps to gain power, they're not thinking about ideology, they're not thinking about activism. They're thinking about what is the politically correct thing to say, and how can I network, how can I gain attention in a safe way? This is how powerful people think. Making YouTube videos is not a path to power. Making anonymous comments on the internet is not a path to power. There is no group power. There are only individuals with power, and they manipulate groups. And that manipulation can be symbiotic, or it can be parasitic, or somewhere in between, mutualist, I don't know. But ultimately, groups don't exist. I mean, the body, if you eliminate the brain as a central organizing organ, the body ceases to exist. It decays. It's unable to coordinate itself, to gather food, energy, and to continue existing. Groups cannot exist without individuals who are capable of organizing them, in the same way that a body can't exist without a head, without a brain, without a mind. So this idea of being part of a mass movement or something, it's a phantasm. It's something that's made up by individuals to justify some course of action which could otherwise not be justified. So Mayan traditionalism, the concept that people who gravitate, whether it's a democratic system or any other form of system, maybe except with the exception of monarchy. A monarchy, theoretically, it's intergenerational, therefore there's no power struggle. Now the problem there is that within a monarchy you have to have some form of delegation, and when you have delegation, well, who's going to be the prime minister? Who's going to be the top advisor to the king? There is then the element of the power struggle. So a monarchy does not solve this problem. You could say it alleviates it in some way, but monarchism does not solve the problem of who shall be in power. In the past, especially in Indo-European societies, violence, direct violence, warrior ethos was the path to power. Henry VIII was just killing his wives. Now today we consider him a sadistic, brutal murderer. We'd consider him to be a serial killer, whatever. But he was the monarch. He was the divine father of the nation. And he ruled by killing women. That was how he ruled. Simply because he felt they were not fertile enough for him. So, you look at a guy like Henry VIII, and that's, it's not to say that all, Henry VIII typifies the average European ruler any more than Nero typifies the average European ruler. But fundamentally, the power of violence and the morality surrounding violence was much different. Now we consider violence the ultimate taboo. You can't ever hurt anyone, harm anyone. You have to have the non-aggression principle. And so what it seems like is we've moved a system like a mafia mob. I think the mafia, the mob, really represents this Indo-European warrior ethos to a T. And that's why people romanticize it. And so really, the romanticization of the mob and the mafia is a hearkening back to the Indo-European warrior spirit. But technology has crushed that spirit because it has granted power to the merchant class and to the priest class. And for these people, they are not, bloodlusty people. They're not people who like swords and fighting and all of these things. Warfare doesn't really get them going. But, you look at the Mayans, and they had this interesting practice of child sacrifice, tearing out organs. And we can see in certain cultures, there might be baby phallus sucking rituals. So you look at this and you're like, well, this isn't really warfare. This isn't violent. This isn't really masculine stuff. This isn't like traditional warrior ethos. It's something else. It's still sadistic. It's still about exerting power over weak people, innocent people, whatever, showing that you're bigger, you're better. You could say it's still along the lines of a psychopathic trait or whatever, but it's in a different way. And so if you look at the Mayans, it's a traditional, it's traditionalist, right? They're sacrificing children, but it's traditionalist. The Mayans, they didn't say you could just kill anybody at any time. It wasn't random. It was a dual morality. It was the idea that some people are allowed to sacrifice kids, but not everybody. And in the Indo-European society, well, some people were allowed to go to war. Some people, you were allowed to go and pillage and rape and do all these things, but only within a certain context. It had to be a different tribe. It had to be, you're a warrior, whatever. So there's a codified, there's still this structure, there's still law that surrounds these violent sadistic actions. And so the Mayan Empire was a traditionalist society where there was a law and a structuring and a priestly rule book surrounding who could do the child sacrificing, when, the time of year, the season, all of those sort of things. And the idea was you have to sacrifice the child to the god to please them. And you see this in the Bible where the God is pleased by the smell of burning flesh. The smell of burning flesh, it pleases him. The aroma pleases. I know this sounds crazy and sounds demonic and satanic, but really this is what you find in the Bible. This is what you find in Mayan traditionalism. This is what we find seemingly in the current mythology of power. Whether it's true, and I'm not even concerned with what is actually going on. What I'm concerned is the psychological projection that people make. They question, what is the power elite up to? What are they doing really behind the scenes? And everyone seems to be going toward this idea that they're very sadistic, They are, to an extent, violent, but they are sexually predatory. This is the assumption that people are making. And whether it's true or not, I'm not concerned with the reality of the situation. I'm not concerned. I'm not trying to indict people or slander people or anything like that. I'm saying that the popular imagination is always groping toward this. And I don't think it's because, the facts are just always pressing upon us. And so we're just these empirical, rational beings who are like, well, this is what it seems to be, so we're going to go with this story. I think there's this ancestral memory that we have that we're like the power elite, the people who want to be in power, the people who seek after power. These are psychopathic, power-hungry people. And because of their tendency and their desire to always be superior to others, they viscerally want to feel that dominance. They're lording over other people. They're looking down on other people. And so because of that, we take this concept to the extreme and we materialize it in a mythology of, all kinds of conspiracy theories. Again, I don't care if they're true or false. That's not the point. The point is that this is what we expect of our rulers. This is who we expect them to be. Either violent in the battlefield, as the Indo-European warrior kings of old, that they're going out and they're slaughtering and they're raping, and this is considered acceptable. It's considered acceptable in Greco-Roman ethics that you're on the battlefield, you defeat your enemy, and you facially sodomize him. I mean, there's all kinds of these sexual humiliation rituals that Indo-European warriors would go through, not because it's not even just the physical, material, bodily pleasure. It's the psychological pleasure of feeling you've dominated the enemy. So this is a historical practice that went on. We know the Vikings, they were ripping people apart and doing these blood eagles and these really disgusting things and throwing out internal organs. We see this in medieval times. Medieval Christianity is not this soft, gooey love everybody, but you have these terrible torture devices designed, the Inquisition designed to just, bring people to the utmost bounds of the pain threshold that's possible. And they would do this. And you have to think that the people who are doing this, they're not just doing it, objectively, like, I don't like this. This kind of bothers me, but we have to do it for practical reasons. They're probably feeling this power. They're feeling this dominance. They enjoy it. And there is something like Freudian about it. There is something sexual about it. There is something perverse about it. But this is something historical. Going back to the Mayans, going back to the warrior ethos, there's a sadism that rules over society. And you can reject that and be a hippie flower child and vote for Hillary Clinton, and she's going to be just as sadistic as the Donald Trumps of the world. And so I don't see that as a solution, just being an anarchist and being part of Antifa and punching right-wing people on behalf of corporations and, supporting LGBT causes on behalf of Google and YouTube and Starbucks and whatever else. That doesn't seem to be a genuine solution forward, because people are still being hurt. They're just not being hurt in the battlefield. They're being hurt psychologically through alienation, suicide, depression, anxiety, all of these psychological maladies. Rather than being this extroverted, I'm going to punch you in the face, I'm going to drive a sword into your heart, it's this introverted self-destruction of the separation of the self from identity, from society, from community. And that is a slow degeneration, inward decay. We're attacking ourselves rather than being attacked from the outside. So I guess pick your poison. The hippies can say that's a better way to go, but I don't think that's a very convincing argument. I'd rather have a quick, painful death than live a life of loneliness and misery and boredom and lack of adventure and a lack of identity and lack of holiness and lack of spirituality, lack of cosmic wonder and mystical excitement and imagination and creativity and vital energies, and the all of people's internal, we talk about this in terms of the breakdown of monogamy, that you have this hypergamy where there are some men who are just, batting it out of the park with their sexual prowess, and they're getting all the chicks, and all the chicks naturally are going toward those alpha males. But then, the people who are not at the top of their game are just totally losing out. And the millennial generation having less sex than previous generations. Even though, pornography is open everywhere, sexual norms are more libertine than ever. People are just totally open to sex before marriage at more than at any other point in European history, because, of course, marriage is a pre-Christian concept. It wasn't invented by Christians. This is something revolutionary, at the same time having less sex than ever. So it's clear that some people are having more sex than ever, and then some people are having less sex than ever. And it's a huge problem, and that's what's happening just generally in society when you break everything down. Stability of marriage, identity, community. Some people are benefiting a lot, and then some people, or the majority of people, are losing out. So I don't know if we understand this. We understand this is just the dynamic. Like, if I wanted to be in power, I wouldn't be making YouTube videos. If you wanted to be in power, you wouldn't be watching my YouTube videos. We have to understand we are part of the group of people here who don't want power. There's a very simple way to gain power. And it starts when you're young. It starts when you're in high school. You start joining all these clubs. You become the president of this. You become the president of that. You build up your speaking skills. You build up your public. You don't bumble your words. You don't repeat syllables like I do. You really hone those speaking skills. Your debate skills are sharp. And you get connected with different organizations. You build up your resume. You go to a good college. You make the right connections. You party. You join a fraternity. And you just say the right things and do the right things, and you don't. Why bother taking a controversial position? Just be everybody's friend, be everybody's pal, and that is the way to do it. And so if you're psychologically, if you are biased toward that way of thinking, you're just naturally going to be drawn toward that path. But that's not most people. That's a minority of people at the end of the day. And then you have this funneling effect. Almost a pyramid shape where you have the majority of people are just not interested in that at all. They want to play their video games. They want a simulation. They're not very inspired. These people are followers, and this is the majority of people, and we have to include ourselves in this category. If we are not in a position of power, it's not someone else's fault. It's our fault, ultimately. And I use that word fault not to try to say that you're an evil person or bad person or an inadequate person, because if you have a society full of vicious psychopaths who are willing to do anything to get power, that's going to be a pretty unstable society, right? You're going to have a lot of internecine disputes and disagreements, a lot of, what do they call it, sectarian violence, right? You're not going to be able to form, like a civilization like China can only form if the majority of people are followers, right? They're not instigators. They're not people who are self-starters. They're not people who are willing to just jump up and live life by the beat of their own drum. They are waiting. They're literally sitting patiently, waiting for instruction from top down so that civilization can work smoothly. That's the only way civilization works, is if the majority of people are domesticable. They're like domestic pets. They're just waiting for a command. This is the majority of people. This is how they have to be in order to have a civilization. There's no other way to have a society without having this kind of structure. And so if you have a bunch of people who are like, "Nah, man, I'm going my own way." If you have people who are doing that, then there's going to be no hierarchy. There's going to be no organization. Everyone's a psychopath. Everyone is their own little feudal lord, their own little gangbanger, their own little, this is my territory, this is your territory. And they don't respect the NAP. They don't respect property rights. They don't respect a higher authority. And it's all just psychopathic egoism. They're constantly shooting each other all the time. I mean, that is something that happens. And it doesn't matter how high IQ you get with it. Okay, now you're very high IQ, so instead of shooting each other, you're scamming each other. And you can't have a functional economy if the whole thing's based on scams. So there's problems with a society of leaders, of pure leaders. It creates problems. So you have to have followers. And you have to recognize, you have to get out of your head that, like, oh, we are going to create the perfect ideology. We're going to create the perfect storm of activism, and the society is like a powder keg waiting to burst. Society in general does not have a latent revolutionary potential. Revolutionary potential is instigated and it's fomented by elites who want change. So when you have a decrepit aristocracy because Europe has stopped going to war, I mean, you have a Europe that was formed in the cauldron of war, just constant warfare. And you slow that down, and you really eliminate a lot of these external threats. So the Vikings go away and they assimilate into their respective cultures. And, the pace of war slows down. And finally, you have the Protestants, the Catholics. They even come to a agreement. They come to an agreement. Oh, we're going to have sovereignty. We're going to respect each other's rights. And so there's this slowing down of the pace of warfare, and the aristocracy degenerates because there's no longer there's this thanatos of war that's keeping them in line, that's keeping them sharp and fit and primed. And you could even say it's a sort of a eugenic pressure. But that falls away and the aristocracy degenerates. And what's left is markets. And so that is the place where there's actual competition and there's pressure, evolutionary pressure. So the markets and the merchant class, they become powerful. They become enabled by this. And they, as Nietzsche notes and as Kalergi notes, the merchant class really becomes the class which deserves to rule because it has struggled. As someone who might not like the merchant class could say something akin to the following. They could say something like, whoever does not struggle does not deserve to live. That would be a sort of social Darwinian statement that you'd think, oh, the warrior class, yeah, whoever does not struggle does not deserve to live. But if you rise above the pure warrior mentality, you realize, well, the warriors, they did stop struggling. They were just sitting back and eating their grapes. They were building their chateau in Paris. This is why the Parisians were the first to fall. France was the first to fall because they were the most degenerate, because they had left they had a split within their own aristocracy, where they had the nobility of war, the old aristocracy, but then they had the nobility of the bureaucracy, people who were ennobled because they were part of this bureaucratic system of taxation, a mercantile system. They had a class. I mean, you look at the changes in dress and the transition toward an effeminacy, an aristocratic. I mean, compare Charlemagne and his clear masculinity to some of these French monarchs, where you really can't tell the men against the women, except the men or the women have these huge push-up bras, essentially, these very tight push-up bras, bodices and whatever. But the men, they're all flowery and extravagant and feminine, powdered face and makeup and big long-haired wigs, right? So the concept of a judge having a long-haired wig, there's this kind of androgyny in there. And it's not entirely outside the bounds of tradition. I'm not even saying it's not traditionalist or anything like that. So, you can defend it, but at the end of the day, the warrior power in itself became self-contradictory. It was no longer based on the warrior ethos. The warrior aristocracy had ceased to uphold itself by a warrior ethos. It was now supporting itself by a mercantile ethos. And so the merchants were really a better fit for that mercantile system that was ultimately created step by step through this evolutionary process in European society. And that's when the merchant class said, hey, I think we deserve to rule because we're the real merchants. We're working for you. We're the tax collectors. We're the people doing the dirty work in the bureaucracy. So we deserve to rule, not you, not the monarch. Why do you deserve to rule? Oh, because your ancestor fought some war. Well, war is no longer relevant. War is, or the practice of war is more about money than it is about swords. Money buys swords. So in a sense, we deserve to rule. And that's when you start getting these Masonic societies, which really builds out of the guild system in a way. The Masonic law, I mean, even the term Freemason, it is a guild-like term, a guild of Freemasons. Masons mean people who build structures, right? So you could say it's like the Free Carpenters or the Free Smelters Society, the Free Smithers Society. The Freemasonic clubs which come about are just people who are intellectuals and bureaucrats and mercantile-minded people and people who are priestly-minded but not of a Christian bent. And they're thinking, hey, the faith of Christianity is coming under doubt. The aristocratic system is coming under doubt. We need to foment a revolution. And that's how the French Revolution got started. And that's how all these other revolutions get started. I mean, that's even how the Protestant Revolution got started. So this is how things happen, from the top down, not the bottom up. So you have to recognize people who talk about revolution. We're going to have a revolution. You say, okay, well, who are the leaders of your revolution? What class are you a part of? Are you the merchant class? Are you the priest class? Are you the warrior class? Who are you? Ultimately, they always identify with the warrior class without recognizing the problems structurally that undermine the warrior class in the first place. They haven't studied the fact that the warrior class has been declining as a class for hundreds and hundreds of years in Europe and Western society broadly And they haven't actually solved any of those fundamental problems, which, again, it's a question, was it a product of technology? Was it a product of ideology? Well, I would say the Protestant Revolution came before the Industrial Revolution, so I'd say the ideas came before the material conditions. But you could also look at it in terms of, Spanglerian cycles of the Islamic world invading Europe and the lack of that oppressive force then freeing up Europe to become more mercantile, releasing it from its warrior obligation. So you could go in that direction. But ultimately, you do have to come down to this fundamental question of, was it the material conditions that changed, or was it fundamentally more, deep idealistic conditions that changed? Was it a progression of ideas or progression of material realities, which is primal there? That's a fundamental question that ultimately needs to be asked. But if we put it to the side, we can at least say that the two influence each other, that one manifests the other, that material conditions do change how people think, that the way that people think does change material conditions, so it does go back and forth in that way. And we can leave it there for the moment, and we can look at this progression that's been happening over time, where the nature of warfare is changing, where not only is the nature of warfare changing, but the way that we view the warrior class and the war ethos and the whole structure of society is changing. And unless you address that on a very deep level, then by saying we're the warrior ethos, we are the defenders of Western civilization, and you're always characterizing yourself in that way, you're never going to get any there. I mean, I would be more convinced by someone who said, we're a priestly class, we're going to have a priestly spiritual revolution. I could see where you're coming from. At least you're self-consistent. At least you understand the field of battle at play. You understand what's going on in terms of power relations. And so, okay, talk to me. You want a priestly revolution. Again, it has to be top down. People are going to accept, if you give them a genuine priestly path, a genuine religious spiritual path, like Christianity was a solution to the identity problems of people who were, they were enticed toward monotheism because of the Pythagorean concept of the monad, which progressed through Plato and his intellectual descendants. So they were attracted to monotheism, but they didn't want to abandon Greco-Roman culture. And Christianity came along and said, well, we already know there's this Jewish tradition, so we're not just pulling monotheism out of thin air. So we're going to attach ourselves to the Jewish tradition, but we're also going to bring in the Greco-Roman tradition, and we're going to synthesize all of that together. And then, oh, by the way, the Germans are then going to Germanize it. We're going to have things like Christmas, which is totally Germanic religion. It has nothing to do with the Greco-Roman or the Jewish tradition. So ultimately, it becomes this tripartite cultural mix. You know, the Russians do their own thing with it in their Byzantine tradition. Okay, so yeah, that's a great solution to a deep fundamental problem that was hitting people at the time. This problem of monotheism. How do we integrate monotheism into the religious system of the Western world? And then the question of identity. We're getting all mixed up here. Rome is no longer what it used to be. Everyone can be a citizen, so there's this problem of cosmopolitanism and urbanism. It needs a solution. Christianity is the right idea at the right time. So if you were to say, okay, well, we're going to have a sort of a second Christianization. We're going to have another form, and I would say it's even the third. And I think I talked about 4 Christianities. I don't remember. But the first Christianity is something like, or you could say the era of Pythagoreanism is a type of Christianization, bringing into this idea of monotheism, okay? And then you have Christianity 1.0, and then you have Christianity 2.0 in, let's say, the Protestant Reformation, which was an ethno-religion of Northern Europeans. Germanic Europeans took upon themselves this ideology of Protestantism in order to distinguish themselves from the Southern Europeans. Okay, and then we can talk about further Christianizations. So if you're on that train and you're saying, okay, we're going to have another religious reformation that addresses the problems of the time, I'm listening. I'm listening to what you're saying if someone wants to put that forth. The problem is that it can't be antithetical to what's going on. You see, Christianity did not arrive antithetical to everything. It didn't say everyone is wrong and only Christianity is right. It said, no, the Jews are right. They just need to be updated. It said, Platonism is technically correct. It just needs to be tied to the Jewish tradition. So it was a syncretism. It was about saying, you're correct, but, going to everybody and saying, yes, you got the right idea, but you also need a little bit of this. So it's not going to be saying, the whole system is wrong and all of this degeneracy is wrong and the way we run society is wrong and every tradition is wrong, Christianity is wrong, New Age, Hollywood, paganism is wrong, the Western tradition is wrong. So there are all these people who are, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, coming at it from a negative sense. If you can come at it from a perennialist position of saying, this is correct and that's correct, and you're correct, but you just need to recognize each other, you need to integrate each other, and that sort of a thing. I mean, John David Ebert has put this forth. I think he is one of the few people who actually engages with, the most up-to-date material. He engages with the university system. The academia system is a global system which has religious, metaphysical undertones. I mean, postmodernism and these French authors who are so obscure and they're postmodernist, right? And so the new religion is not going to be a religion which rejects postmodernism, because postmodernism is this religious movement that captured the imagination of the intellectuals of the Western world. It's not going to be a religion that rejects postmodernism. It says yes, but. It says yes, okay, you're critiquing, okay, you're skeptical, okay, I get it. You're breaking things down using the Socratic method. Great, okay, I see where you're going. But we need to take this to the next level. We need to take it to a hypermodernism. We understand your critique. We understand the thanatos implicit in there. We've killed death. Death has been killed. God's been killed. But also death has been killed. Sin has been killed. We've killed all these things off. We've killed killing itself. Violence has been removed from our society in a big way. Mortality rates are down. Things are safe. We no longer have that pressure of thanatos. And that's where postmodernism comes in, this Nietzschean prediction where the warrior no longer has an enemy to fight. He's no longer oppressed by death, and so he oppresses himself psychologically. He uses the spirit of death to cut away at different ideas, to destabilize institutions. That's what happens. That's legitimate. That's a natural progression. So we have to ask, what's the next stage? What's the next stage of that? Well, clearly, postmodernism has its limits, and we need to start going we need to take it beyond itself and bring it into a new stage where you're not just questioning everything, breaking everything down, but you're getting back to a point of you're recognizing the already existing axioms. You're recognizing and reifying existing myths and axioms and codifying them and formalizing them, because we do have them. We have an anti-Nazi mythos as fundamental to academia, that you can question everything, but you can't question the evils of Nazism. So that is an axiom that we can build off. We can look at that. We can say, okay, we do have a sense of moral objectivity when it comes to this area. So we understand that. Okay, well then can we critique that? Can we critique that? That's a question that we can ask. We can use, this is a hidden, unseen factor of postmodernism. We can take postmodernism and say, oh, you can question everything, right? Okay, well let's question that axiom. What does that leave us with? It leaves us with nothing. And so in that plane of nothing, tabula rasa, then that empty void, nature abhors a vacuum, then you can get something out of that. Then you can have a return to, okay, we're going to recognize and reify this axiom, this principle. And to take it back to the Mayans, they recognized they had a dual morality, that it was okay to do this extreme, violent, sadistic act, but only within a ritualistic setting. So by ritualizing things, we are able to create distinguished spaces where you have a sense of law and order in general, but then there are spaces in which the Dionysian is unleashed in a controlled manner. It's a controlled demolition in a way. And so the people who have rejected the church, they think, oh, the Mass is silly, Christ is stupid, the sky god is stupid, God up in the sky, that's dumb. Who's the, I'm trying to think, Cage the Elephant, whatever the lead singer is, his name's like Schultz. I think his name is Schultz. And Schultz says something like, if you believe that unicorns live in your shoes, that's fine, but if you tell me how to wear my shoes, that's not okay. You're an oppressive Christian fascist. And you hear that, and it's like, look, dude, we're going to have rules in society, and people are going to tell you what to do, and you need to deal with it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they're going to be people who are the rule makers, And these people, we have to recognize that these are going to be somewhat psychopathic people. These are going to be power-hungry people. You have to allow them a controlled space where they're able to exercise their sadism in a way that is limited. It can't be unlimited. They can't just nuke the whole world. But it has to be limited. And if we recognize it for what it is, then